Hi, Emily. Thank
Hi,
you so
Lena.
much for agreeing to do this interview with me. I'm really looking forward to learning more about your experience of being a minority, if that is part of your experience. I don't want to project any ideas onto you. Um, so I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you respond to that question of
Yeah.
what is it like to be a racial minority in the United States?
That is a really good way to ask the question because where I'm at today, currently, I am 34 years old. I live in Hawaii. I am ethnically Chinese and Vietnamese. My parents were Vietnamese refugees from the war. And I've lived in Hawaii for 7 years. And here, I don't feel like a minority.
Right.
I feel like the majority. And it's really nice because for once in my life, I feel like I blend in. Like, people don't question, like, oh, like where I'm from. Maybe they question where I'm from because of my accent. Like, I don't sound like I'm from Hawaii, but I look like I'm from Hawaii. So it feels good to finally feel like I'm home in a sense, and not have people question. Because growing up, I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood, and I went to a Catholic school, but it was predominantly an Italian and Irish Catholic school. And a lot of that school, the students there had a lot of kind of ancestry, and like there was like Irish and Italian rivalry within them. And then I was the minority in that school, and there were other students in that school. There were it was black students. I was probably the only Asian, and then there was one Puerto Rican girl, and she was like my best friend. And growing up in that environment, then I felt like the real minority.
So you were the only Asian person in the whole school?
Not in the whole school, in my class.
In your class?
Yeah, in my class. What was actually kind of nice was that in each grade there was like one token Asian person. So we all kind of gathered together, and it turned out we all lived in the same neighborhood too. It's like, I think because our parents were minorities and also refugees too, or from some other country, we kind of gravitated towards each other in our own little community.
Yeah.
So that was nice to have each other in that sense. But thinking about and preparing for this chat, I realized there was a lot of denial I had as a child. Yeah, and just thinking about how as children we just want to fit in.
Right.
We just want to like get along with everybody and be part of the crowd.
Be accepted.
Be accepted, yeah, loved, seen, and heard. And I realized as a kid I tried really hard to fit in without realizing how I did it, without the awareness that I have now as an adult. So as a kid, I realized my last name is Toe, T-O, and I didn't want the kids to call me Toe because it's like toes on your feet. They'd be like, ew, toes,
Yeah.
So I had them call me Emily 2, like the number 2.
Yeah.
Because you say, like, when you read T-O, it's 2. So they always called me Emily 2. And if they made fun of me, it would be like Emily 5, 6, or 7. Like, they would call me a number, instead of like Emily Toe Jam or Stinky Toes or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I think that was like kind of thing I did, and none of my cousins did it. Nobody who had the same last name as me did it, just me. And I think that was part of like I wanted to fit in, and I knew I was gonna get made fun of. I just didn't want to get made fun of so bad.
Right.
So like little stuff like that, I realized I tried to assimilate in some ways and tried to be a little bit just I knew I was gonna make fun of. I just didn't want it to be that bad.
Did you feel like you were being made fun of because of your ethnicity?
Because of my ethnicity, I think so. I think because I was so different from everybody and they weren't familiar. Like there was not a lot of like education around it. Like we didn't have like multicultural days or anything like that as a kid when I was in grade school. And I think with kids, kids, if they don't know anything, they tend to like make fun of it instead of be like curious or want to know more or be super friendly. And there was one thing I really remember as a kid, that in recess they used to play this game and it was called Chink. And I didn't know why, and I'd never thought of it as being racist, and I still don't think the origins of it is racist, but it's kind of like playing racquetball. Like you're hitting a ball against the wall, you bounce it on the ground, and then it hits the wall, and then it comes back and you hit it again. And it's called Chink, and I would like to justify it in my mind and be like, oh, maybe because it's the sound, it goes chink, like it clinks a little bit. But as a kid, I was like, that doesn't sound really nice to call that gay chink. But I never said anything about it, you know, because I was like the
Right.
minority. So yeah, I definitely felt like the minority in my childhood in the way we were raised. But luckily, I had cousins, I had family, I had other people to look up to. And it wasn't until I was in high school that I went to an inner city magnet high school. It's called Central High School, and it was all about diversity. So that was the first time I met other Asian kids who grew up in similar situations, and felt like I was part of something. So it wasn't until high school and college I really felt like, oh, I'm proud to be Asian, and I'm proud to be a part of my community.
Right. And did you find that you gravitated to those groups of people, or that your friend group was kind of mixed, or?
I definitely gravitated towards those type of people because
Yeah.
it was just felt more familiar and it was easier to relate, and it
Yeah.
wasn't like I felt safe with them, you know. And we grew up in similar ways where most of our parents worked in restaurants and were super busy or had laundromats or something like
Right.
that, and working full time just trying
Yeah.
to get us through school. So we all had each other in that kind of sense. So that was really nice.
And fast forward to today,
Yeah.
do you feel like you still find that same sense of like comfort and home in the people that share your like Asian American kind
Yeah.
of
I do.
demographic?
I think so. It's interesting here in Hawaii, though, because in Hawaii, most of my friends are not of Asian descent. Maybe because on where I live on the Big Island, like most local people are local Hawaiians, and they tend to be working a lot in the tourism industry. So I actually made a lot of local Hawaiian friends when I was working a lot. And that was just like a different dynamic too, because I don't really feel like I fit in their world either, even though I am Asian and I kind of look like them, but they just have so much history and mixture, and I don't want to like culturally appropriate on Hawaiian culture. That's kind of like the
see.
fine line I feel about here. Like I find that even though I can pass off as Hawaiian, and maybe if I pull off the accent, but to me that also feels like cultural appropriation because I'm not Hawaiian. I don't want to pretend to be. I want to honor and respect their culture. So yeah, there's a fine line in that area too. So I've kind of just come to terms with like I'm unique in my own way, and I appreciate my culture, and I try to educate and teach people about it if they ask. But all this stuff that's come up with like Stop Asian Hate and all this stuff that's happening because of COVID, like it's really sad and makes me really distraught. I definitely feel like I'm in a bubble here in Hawaii because the majority is mostly of Asian descent, so I feel really safe here.
Yeah.
But thinking about my family and my friends on the mainland, like they've definitely, you know, have been harassed and have had things happen to them. Like my parents still work in a predominantly like unsafe area, so they get a little
in
harassed.
Philadelphia.
Yeah, in Philadelphia. So I'm having mixed feelings about it. You know, like I feel like we should educate people about. I don't know. It's just hard because I feel like the people who are causing these like are angry people who don't know how to like process their feelings about the situation, and they take it out on other people, and you know, and it's like that's not fair nor right, you know. And but it's like I have mixed feelings about that totally.
Yeah, something you said earlier really struck me, that it's the people who feel oppressed that are oppressing other people.
Yes, absolutely.
That's really interesting. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, I find that they feel like they have lack of power. So in order to get power is to like terrorize or hurt other people who don't have as much power. So I find that like the Stop Asian Hate thing, like you see the people who are being harassed are like old Asian people, or like these restaurants or businesses that are kind of like in these really tight situations, you know. Like I don't see people harassing like younger Asian people or like bigger Asian guys or something like that, you know. And they're just taking it out because it's easier to take out on older people because they're not going to do anything back, which is really like terrible, you know. And so I have mixed feelings about that, and I don't know, you know, like what their backgrounds are or what it could be, but it just seems like there's this pattern of like not being able to, feeling powerless and then taking out other people, basically being a bully, you know.
Right.
So, and really bullies are just a bunch of hurt people who don't know how to process their feelings, but it doesn't make it right either.
I kind of wonder if we lack, as a human race, some central, like, focal point of shared belonging.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's like there's this epidemic of othering
Yes.
between groups where it's like, I know who I am because I know who I'm not.
Yes.
So it's like we're defining ourselves based on this polarity and duality because we're not focusing on, like, our shared humanity.
Yes. Yes. It never felt like we're united or we're all in this together. It never really does. It's always me versus you. And what was interesting in, like, growing up in a predominantly black neighborhood, it was like, and going to a Catholic white school, it's like mostly the black kids would make fun of me, you know, but it was because they were being made fun of or they were always a minority. And then we came along and now we're the minority. The white kids would make fun of us too, but in a different way. That was more of a, like, for me it was more of like they were richer. So it was kind of, I felt like they looked more down on me, like, because I was, like, poorer, or I didn't have the nice clothes or the things that they had. Whereas, like, the black kids were picking on me because they were picked on all the time, so they get to pick on me now, you know? And so it was just having to find my way and my niche, and my like, group of friends were, like, the Puerto Rican girl, or, like, one other black girl that was really nice, and I fit in because I became the teacher's pet. So I felt safe that way, you know, because I was like, well, the teacher likes me, you can't really hurt me, you know? And I feel like maybe that's why a lot of Asian kids fall into that stereotype in some ways. Well, just culturally, like, being studious and obedient and whatever. But for me personally, I felt safer being the teacher's pet because I felt like the teacher was looking out for me in some senses, and they trusted me. Like, if I were to ever say anything, or if I were to, like, tattletale, like, I feel like the teacher would believe me just because, you know, I was a well-behaved student.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I kind of feel that in high school, similarly, you know, at that time where you're going through puberty and all of these changes, and, like, there's this, like, attraction between the sexes, I kind of felt like I, as a woman, like, I stuck to schoolwork because it was, like, that safety of, like, this is grounding for me, like, this kind of protects me from all of, like, the drama of high school.
Totally.
But I kind of wonder, like, my next question is, do you feel oppressed in different ways, like, as an Asian woman, like, in the relationships or kind of dating that you've experienced? Like, there's kind of, like, these expectations in school where it's like, oh yeah, Asian people are supposed to be smart, and then there's also, like, the whole stereotype of, like, Asian women being submissive, and I just wonder if, like, that's been featured in your reality.
Totally. I think it was interesting because prior to moving to Hawaii, I dated mostly Asian guys, and there was a lot of comfort there because I grew up and had similar upbringings and understood each other. And then coming to Hawaii, I dated mostly non-Asian guys, mostly white guys, and I don't know if it was just an interest or, like, a thing. I think it was just maybe just me trying to explore something different too and having curiosity around that, but I didn't feel like I was objectified, like, oh, there's an Asian chick, I need to talk to her, with the guys I dated. But I do feel like there is a sense of that in some ways. They're like, oh, you know, someone exotic. But where I really do feel like stereotyped a little bit as an Asian American woman is in the massage industry.
Oh, okay.
So I'm a massage therapist here in Hawaii, and there's definitely the stereotype around that of, like, oh, if you're Asian and you're a massage therapist, you probably work at a, like, you know, a happy place or something that's really inappropriate. So I've run into that a few times, and that's kind of hard to, like, navigate a little bit because there's definitely a security issue with that, you know. But I've learned that, you know, there's definitely other precautions you can take, like security cameras and intake forms, and, like, questioning these people and being really strong in my own boundaries to really know that. So I think in perspective of my race and in my occupation, it's like I know that there is a stereotype of that, and because of that, I am a little bit more on guard. Whereas I feel like my friends who are not Asian and they're massage therapists, they probably don't worry about that as
Yeah.
much. But they still get maybe hit on or harassed or something like that because they're women. But being Asian adds another flavor to it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Have you ever had to deal with a situation like that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I've had people come in and like kind of look me up and down and then ask me questions. And the telltale sign that they want something more is when you go in the room and they're laying on the table butt naked. And then they tell you, oh, I don't need a massage sheet. And I'm like, no, you need a massage sheet. That's by state law, it's required to drape you, and I'll explain it once, you know, but if anything happens further to that, then I'm like, all right, person, you have to leave this room. This is not the place. Here's your money. You can go. So there's definitely situations that have happened, and I also can't blame them for that because there are places like that, you know, so there's that dynamic too. Like if there weren't places like that, then maybe we wouldn't run into the situation as much. So it's just kind of like the reality of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I have definitely faced that as a body worker, like people calling me, you know, men, and then, you know, asking what the issue is, and then explaining that they want work done in that area.
Yeah.
And then being kind of like, you know, indirect about it, but like still picking up the subtext and being like,
yeah.
But for me, it was kind of like an afterthought. It was kind of like, did that really happen?
Yes.
So it's interesting being on that side of like kind of expecting it to happen.
Yes. Like,
and
it's a little bit more on the forefront for me when I see a client, and if it's a male and they come by themselves and then they ask strange questions, and I'm like, oh, this is how they see me, or, you know, so just
does that make you angry?
Does it make me angry?
Because it would make me angry.
Right. Like, yeah, I definitely, the time that it happened to me, I was really angry. I was like so pissed because I pretty much yelled at this person because I was like, this is not the place, because I warned them enough, you know, I make them fill out a form and stuff like that. I'm like, this is not appropriate, it's not okay. By the end of it, I'm like yelling, and I'm like, that I feel violated, you know, this is my space and this is my job, and so I do feel angry about it, and I vent, you know, and I have friends that I talk to, but I'm just thinking like, what could I have done better? And I don't think it wasn't my fault.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I realize when people are victimizing other people, it's because they don't see me as a person. They just see me as an object. So I think that just comes with an understanding of like over time of being like picked on or bullied on or whatever. And then now as an adult and helping other people, like I used to help kids and work with kids in school, and I had worked with kids that had like autism or disabilities, and some of them were bullies because they were always picked on because they had a disability. So they ended up being a bully and being mean to other kids, and I'm like, I get it now. You know, it's just like, because they're not getting what they need in some place, so they're taking it out in other ways, and they don't see the people that they're hurting because they're hurt.
Yeah, I kind of think of that whole dehumanizing domino effect as this kind of like vampiric disease, where it's like you get bit and then you become one that like bites.
Yes, I definitely, that's a great way to put it, and the analogy, because I feel like we don't have a way or a system for people to properly process their feelings and issues, and we shun them a lot for doing these bad things or whatever, versus trying to help them and help them figure it out. You know, like our system in America isn't the best when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you say that, because, you know, as a student of psychology, I feel like it all boils down to that, like giving people the space, like especially children, when they're starting to become conditioned by the culture to be able to process all of these things that are happening. But we just kind of ignore it, and then it ends up bubbling up later in these really, really tense situations, and violence and war, and
totally. Like I just find that, like, I don't know why, like when I read articles about like sex offenders and stuff like that, and when you the psychology and behind them is like usually they were sexually harassed as a child, and
Right.
then they perpetrate it, and then they continually do it, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's just this pattern and this cycle that people can't break, and I don't know how we can help people in that way. So I think for me, I'm always trying to break the cycle,
Yeah.
in some sense, in terms of just knowing that people are being like harassing other Asians or minorities or whatever. It's like I want to make an extra effort to be extra nice, or like, and maybe that's me compensating as well. I don't know, you know.
Extra nice to minorities.
To like other minorities, to
Right.
other people, and just to like educate or like talk about it a little bit more often. And I think what's good about everything that's happening is like people are talking about it more.
Yeah.
Because like culturally, we just like brushed it under the table and we never talked about it. And I think the biggest part is just the communication and connecting with other people to understand that we're all in this kind of together, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, vulnerably, I have felt like some blocks to having these
Yeah.
conversations because, you know, like I wear this mask of the oppressor, and so I feel sensitive of like I don't want to offend someone, or
Yeah.
I don't want to say the wrong thing, but yeah, it does take that kind of willingness to allow someone to teach you
Yeah.
about something that you don't know. So
right.
I guess I would like to close with the question of, you know, how can, you know, white people or the dominant population, you know, best support minorities in your perspective, like in addition
Yeah.
to kind of having these conversations.
I think, like you said, like having conversations, communicating, really just listening to people and trying to understand their story and where they came from, and giving them a voice. I think that's a lot of part of it. Like being a minority, sometimes you don't feel like you have a voice. So having the avenue to share and communicate in that way to other people who don't understand is actually a great kind of way to like heal and to process all those things. So I think, yeah, that's probably the biggest one. And for people to be curious and just ask people like questions like, oh, you know, tell me about yourself, or and being open to like listening and without judging, and just being curious, I think is a big one. Yeah, because I feel like as children we tend to like be curious and then poke fun, you know. But I think now as adults, it's like let's just actually be genuinely curious and a little bit more open and more empathetic to people and their situations, because we all came from somewhere.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like, that piece of empathy, because like if I don't learn the skills to have empathy for my experiences of victimization, then how can I have empathy for other people?
Exactly.
Right? Because like when I put myself in your shoes, I imagine, you know, ways that I felt, you know, oppressed like as a woman.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it's like I can kind of understand where you're coming from, because it's like an expansion of that feeling that I have. It's like a further othering of another aspect of yourself that's not a part of the dominant population.
Yeah.
So like for me, like to be in a relationship with a man, for instance, like if the man is to acknowledge the fact that like oppression of the feminine exists, like that all of a sudden, like that just like changes the whole dynamic of our relationship.
Totally.
But like the second that they deny it or try to pretend like it doesn't exist, that like that is what creates this like dissonance in the field.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally, I agree. It's just accepting where people are at and where we are at, and just knowing that your truth and my truth might not be the same, but that's your truth, and to honor it, you know? And that's the biggest thing too.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all this.
Absolutely, this was perfect.
Just so grateful to hear your voice, and just how much compassion you really have for you know, your ethnic minority group, and also just humanity just coming through in the way you express this dilemma and this experience. Just so, you know, level, like such like a level head, but also like
Yeah.
sharing how it really has influenced you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This was awesome.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.